Jeremy Scott, welcome to In Fashion.
Thank you.
I want to start by talking about your last collection because for me that really sort of symbolised everything you do so perfectly, you know, the boldness and the brightness, but then that nod to sort of street and skate culture and popular culture. Can you talk to me a bit about the ideas behind that and what you were trying to sort of put across?
Sure. Well, I always love color and print. I'm very pro print, pro color. I kind of feel like those are the best tools any designer can use to convey a message. And for me, you know, even just using color to contrast itself to make a kind of a friction or a frivolity itself can be kind of so striking alone, much less, you know, adding print into the mix. And of course, street style has always been just kind of in my blood. I've always loved the way people make, you know, choices of taking things that they're maybe inspired by from the runway and the things that they actually can get. And I always was kind of doing that as a kid growing up. I mean, I always loved, you know, vintage clothes and thrift stores and mixing that kind of style with the things that I was emulating as a kid on the runways and the stuff I loved in rap videos and pop stars wearing and kind of trying to feel like how I could assimilate all those kind of elements together. So it was always kind of just part of my DNA growing up of loving this kind of juxtaposition of elements and diverse things that kind of create its own lethal cocktail of a look.
I like that. You mentioned kind of when you were growing up and what inspired you, but you weren't growing up in a particularly sort of fashion-centric environment because you grew up on a farm, that's right, isn't it? Do you remember when your first sort of memory or like encounter with fashion came along? Was it with a magazine? Where did you discover fashion?
Yeah, it was around when I was 14 that I realized there was this other world of high fashion, like kind of floating on a cloud above the world that I had already kind of understood of things that were at stores and clothes that were at the mall. But it was actually the original Details magazine that I saw a lot of it, and ID magazine, of course, was very influential. Because they were showing so much, again, it was the mix. There was like the street pictures of kids wearing the clothes on the street and how they really dressed themselves. And then there was the high fashion runway elements, and then there was the things that were kind of mixed together by stylists and shoots. And it was just kind of, all of it was very intoxicating. And I just kind of fell in love with this world, and I was just determined that that was where I belonged, not on the farm, of course, but in this other world.
So did you really start to sort of, because expressing yourself through your clothes has always been sort of obviously a big part of who you are and how you operate. Is that sort of how that started and how you started to kind of involve yourself in fashion? Was it through replicating those looks? And
Absolutely. I was always very conscientious about what I was wearing and very, you know, that was more my passion for going to school. When I was going to high school, it was basically to get dressed. I could care less about any of my classes or any of the tests or frankly almost any other student except for a couple of my very close friends. And I just really was concerned about what look I was going to put together, because that was what I was obsessed with, was just kind of creating different, you know, styles and looks and just trying to make the most interesting thing I could make happen on my body.
what was your aesthetic like then as opposed to now, or can you still see that thread running through?
Oh yeah, I mean, I still have clothes that I wear that I wore when I was 14, which, you know, it's kind of amazing in one way that I could still like it, and kind of amazing in another way that I could still fit into it. But yeah, there's vintage pieces I've had my whole like adult life, as far as I can remember, that I love and that I still wear and I still cherish. And so there's a lot of similarity. I mean, I go through, like anybody, I go through different moods and different phases. I mean, I've kind of gone through different, you know, there's times where I am more hip-hoppy, there's times where I am more grungy, there's times where I am, you know, even sometimes I've done slight preppy looks. That's a little more rare for me, but it's always twisted preppy, of course. But yeah, I've kind of done all kinds of looks and also kind of, you know, mixed them all in different ways. I've never really been one solid category. Even when we were in school, I didn't, you know, I kind of hung out with some of the cheerleaders and the popular kids, some of the skaters, some of the new wave kids, some of the, kids that were all into hip hop, and it just kind of intermingled with everyone because there was things that I had in common with them all, and things that we shared from my likes of music or style.
I'm interested that you say there's pieces that you still wear that you wore when you were younger, because I've read in interviews that you've done before that that's kind of how you approach design. You love this idea of it's a daughter like rediscovering her mother's like dress or jacket. Absolutely. Or something like that. Is that how you try and approach design, thinking about pieces and how they'll interact with a person rather than just thinking seasonally?
Yeah, I also think a lot about my memories of things that I loved and that I wore, or things that I wanted to have or wanted to wear, and the kind of moods, almost like I think of it as like a fragrance that you kind of waft, and you don't really, it's something you can't really touch and it's not tangible, but I think about those sometimes when I'm creating a collection and trying to capture that same mood of a moment in my life, or a moment that I would like to emulate in that sense. So I try to think about that in a way so that clothes can have these lives and these longevities. And I love the idea that some of my clothes can be rediscovered again in another generation. And that's what's really important to me. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I did my collaboration with Adidas, because I wanted to have things that were more accessible and affordable and available for people without compromising my vision, so that those items would be more populous and be out in the world, so that they could have more of an opportunity to be picked up in 25 years by some new cool kids then who are like, wow, I love this, and isn't this so 2012, and having so much fun with it, and kind of having those clothes have a life. I think that's, for me as a designer, my goal is to communicate with people through what I do. And so, when my clothes are really being lived in the life, that's the ultimate kind of reward. I want people to have photos of themselves with their clothes on their Facebook pictures and in their Instagrams and in their memories, and to be part of their memories.
Do you remember the first piece of clothing you ever made?
I think the first thing I made was actually out of paper. I had done all this like Japanese newsprint, and I was trying to use it like fabric, and I was scotch taping it together, and I made a paper jacket.
It's very Hussein Shalayan.
And then I think the next thing I had made was a velvet hat, but I was just kind of making it the way I thought it should be made, but somehow in the end there was like a big gaping hole because the pattern pieces didn't match. But those were things I was doing when I was like 12 years old. So.
And what was the point where you started to think about, fashion as a career and fashion as something that you completely wanted to do and something that you were really ambitious with? When was that point? I
think I started to look at it more like that maybe around 16, 17, and I thought, oh, okay. It was very much a passion. I just thought it was something I enjoyed, so I didn't really think of it as a job. A job seemed really boring. So, and I also kind of felt like there weren't so many people, I felt like there were, at that time, a lot of the designers looked very kind of men, not very kind of fun, cool people you wanted to hang out with, except for Jean-Paul Gaultier and then John Galliano. So I kind of didn't really have that many people to kind of emulate, because I didn't really ever wear a suit and a tie, and I didn't kind of feel like that. So it was until I saw more people like them, and I thought, oh, yeah, these could be people that you would want to hang out with, and it would be something, it was something I could visualize myself in that kind of context. And I realized it was something I was really prolific at, designing was something that just came so effortless to me, and I got so much enjoyment from sketching outfits and sketching ideas, and then I kind of thought, oh, well, I guess this is something I need to pursue.
The period where you went on to sort of study fashion, was that very formative? Because that was quite a difficult, you've talked before about trying to sort of break in, trying to intern, find places to work. Was that quite a formative time in your aesthetic, and how did you keep that ambition going?
Yeah, definitely when I went to school, I was not really prepared for the amount of hard work that it really entails to be a designer, because I didn't know what it really entailed. I just liked clothes and I liked style, and I did not know how to cut and sew and make patterns and drape and all of this stuff that I suddenly was thrown into, and I had no preconceived idea about, and I had no prerequisite abilities for. So I kind of was in a panic. I remember my first year of college, because I really didn't know how I was going to do it, and it just kind of was one of those things where, you got to the breaking point where it either was going to happen or it wasn't, and then finally, okay, it happened. I started to be able to wrap my brain around it and be able to catch up to, I think everyone else in my class had already had like sewing lessons and had been taught to sew by their mom or something else. There was like all this other stuff, and I kind of was just like, hey, like here I am. So, and then from there going on to, like, I moved to Paris 3 months after I graduated from school, because I really wanted to kind of immerse myself into this world of high fashion that I had always emulated in the magazines and imagined about. And I just wanted to go and get an internship and just even pick pins off the floor from, an atelier of a designer that I respected. And it just, sadly, it didn't happen. I tried and tried and tried, and it just was a very like closed door situation there. I had no connections, and I had no letters of recommendation or whatever else it needed to kind of get through the front door. And then ultimately, I was like grifting around, staying on people's couches and people's floors, and slept in the subway one night, and it was kind of just homeless and trying to figure it out. And then this one French kid was like, well, if you're so great, then just do it yourself. And I thought, well, yeah, fuck you, I will. And that's because kind of my attitude. I took that challenge, and I just thought, okay, yeah, I'm gonna put on my own show and I'll do this. And not really thinking more about it as like going forward of where it would end, but just that immediate moment and how immediate it was for me to kind of be able to express myself, because it was burning inside me. I was wearing anything I could to express what my thoughts were about fashion, and then I wasn't having the outlet to kind of further that until I could, show it as a collection. So I pulled everything together, pulled my resources. There was friends that said, oh, I could do lighting. I have lighting from my art exhibition, and someone's like, oh, I can do the sound, and someone else is like, oh, I know a venue, and people that I knew that could model, and it was just kind of just threw it together, and it just kind of happened, and miraculously enough, it kept happening and happening and happening and happening again for the last 15 years.
I mean, I love the fact that you said fashion was kind of this like closed door environment when you went to Paris, and I'm wondering on the effect that has had throughout your career, and how you've designed or how you've approached your work, because it seems that a huge part of what you do, and you did mention it with the Adidas collaboration, is this sense of fun and accessibility and letting people in. Do you think that came from that sort of trying to break into that closed Paris?
It's interesting. I never thought about it like that. I just always felt like I'm a populist. I love pop culture, and I love that world, and I'm very pro pop culture. I never been ashamed of liking pop music. I mean, even when I was in high school, and like all my friends listened to The Cure and Depeche Mode and The Smiths, and all this other stuff that at that time was, especially being in America, a lot of the English bands were very, you had to do research. There wasn't the internet, and so it was a lot harder to understand and have that kind of musical taste. And I, at the same time, liked Madonna and Cyndi Lauper and whatever things were, Stacey Q, things that were just popular in music, because I've always kind of had that kind of taste as well. And I think it's fine to mix it, and there wasn't a kind of a barrier, and I felt like that's kind of always been something that's kind of been a part of my dichotomy, is having this kind of maybe sometimes very extreme ideas or extreme vision, but wanting to share it with everyone at the same time and not feeling like it has to be only for a rarefied few.
Why is that so unique in fashion though? Because I think so much of the sort of identity of fashion is about this sense, as you say, kind of it being a select few and it being exclusive and it being difficult and unapproachable. Why hasn't that kind of, do you think with the internet that is going to start to have to change? But why is everyone so closed off?
That's a good question. I've never really thought about why it is. It just always just has been like fashion, the fashion world and fashion people have just kind of been their own little nucleus. And I mean, of course the internet's helped, I mean, but it's also just kind of exalted some people to be, you know, maybe icons, you know, like, I mean, after the September issue, you know, Grace Coddington became very iconic for so many young people. And after the Vogue View, I forget what the last documentary, and so many people saw the amazing work of Caroline Serf, and, you know, so a new generation gets to see her and she becomes very iconic to them. I don't know if it's because of the not having exposure or if it's just, part of it is just price. When you get down to the fashion of it, so much of high fashion is ridiculously expensive. I mean, to the point that it's like absurd. And, you know, I think that that's kind of a detriment to, for me as a designer, I would see that as a detriment. I would want my clothes to, and I do want my clothes to have a life and to be able to be out on the streets and be on people's back, and for people to have fun with it and wear it and not make it so precious that they don't wear it, or that they, you know, have it in their closet that they're like afraid to get it dirty. You know, I think that, you know, that's, to me, a real sign of success is that people are wearing your clothes and that people are having it as part of their life, and that's what's really exciting. I mean, it's not always, you know, of course there's things that are cost prohibitive sometimes depending on what you're designing, but I mean, a lot of high fashion is just high for no reason.
I'm interested in this idea of idols, because we've talked about it a little bit, but what is it in your opinion that makes something sort of iconic or an idol? Why do you, because you've done, you know, Bart Simpson and everything from,
sure.
What is it that makes something iconic?
Well, I think it's the thought that, you know, you can convey a message without having to even speak, because they're so universal and recognizable. And that's what's so attractive about icons. I mean, when, you know, Mickey Mouse is basically, you know, something that someone in Dubai and Mumbai and Dubai and London and Kansas City and, you know, all over the world can all kind of you know, have this conception of. So if you're doing something, you're twisting something around Mickey Mouse, it's easily understood and so instantaneous. And I feel like that's kind of the thing about icons, and it just is it's like a way to speak more loudly and clearly to more people. And I feel like
it's a global language.
Yeah, and that's what's so attractive about it to me. It goes back to pop culture and to communication and to being a populist and trying to, you know, have a message that can be understood. I feel like a lot of times people can look at my shows and really pretty much understand it, whether they're in fashion or not. Doesn't mean they have to like it. It's just that they understand it, and it's not so, you know, like you need a dissertation to understand it. Like sometimes lofty high fashion can have that kind of feeling. Like you have to understand that these were some, you know, minimalist black paintings that were 15 times painted black with 15 shades of black, and that's what these pants are inspired by. It's like a bunch of malarkey as far as I'm concerned. You know, it's like, okay, you like black, you know, it's not my world, that kind of mentality. And I think what's more exciting to me are things that can be more universal.
I find it interesting, especially given, like, now you show in New York, because you haven't always shown in America, but is there an element where sometimes, do Americans ever not get it? Do you ever have that, where, because you look at American culture so much and you kind of unpick it?
Sure.
Do you ever, because as much as a lot of what you do, as you say, it is to make everyone understand it, but do you ever feel that people have missed the joke?
I'm sure there's people that miss the joke, or there's sometimes people that have a different interpretation of it, and I'm actually fine with that. I like that my work can also have, like, you know, when you go to a museum and you see a painting that's maybe abstract, or you're not, you know, you can see one thing in it, the person next to you is looking at it, sees another thing, and you can interpret something else in it, and that I think is kind of really, you know, a great quality. And it's fine to also, I a lot of times things I do speak on more than one level at the same time. There's maybe one thing that's broadcast and there's like simultaneously 3 other messages that's going on, and that's kind of just the way my work is, and I'm pleased with people having different interpretations.
We touched a little bit on it there, but the geography of where you show, are you much more comfortable being in New York now? Does that feel kind of where you should be?
I mean, I started in Paris, and I spent 7 years almost in Paris before I moved to Los Angeles. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, I started showing in New York just because I was in America suddenly. And I thought, oh, well, why not? It kind of makes sense. I thought I would just do it for a minute, and then I kind of got in a role, and as you know how fashion, it's like a spinning wheel. It's like by the time I'm done with one season, I'm ultimately starting the next one. So it just kind of was like, oh, okay. And then after, I think when I hit my 10-year anniversary, I had a dinner and a party at the Ritz in Paris, and it just reminded me of how much I missed Paris and how I started there. And so I flipped back to Paris for several seasons, and then came to London for one season and showed my Flintstones-inspired collection to pay homage to this city that I love so much, and so many people that have been so supportive of my career. And then flipped back to New York, where I have been. And I mean, part of it maybe is just lazy, because it is just a 4-hour flight for me to go there from LA. So part of it is that it's ultimately now, I don't feel like it matters so much where you show, as you pointed out about the internet. I feel like, you know, so many people are seeing the show via the, you know, websites and internet and style.com and, you know, SHOWstudio and, you know, all these different formats. So I feel like in one way my show could be anywhere. It's ultimately the same group of girls that were, you know, starting in New York, then they go to London, Milan, and Paris. The one thing about New York is that everyone's a little more fresh, because everyone hasn't gone through the rigmarole. And so you're not having girls turn up with like styes in their eye from like dirty makeup brushes from 3, you know, weeks of, you know, having makeup applied and reapplied, and they're like basically on the verge of tears because it's like one more show to do. And you know, yeah, it's ultimately also the same audience for the large part that are traveling in a pack to see these shows. So it kind of felt like nowadays it doesn't really matter. I could probably be showing literally in my own studio in Los Angeles and transmitting it, and no one would know, you know, where it really is, because so few people are actually in that one space. So I don't really put so much pressure or precedence on it as much. But I love that I have these connections to these different cities, which I feel like is a rare thing for a designer, because a lot of times it is very like, there's Chanel and it's Rue Cambon, and it's very steeped in the history of Paris, which is wonderful and beautiful. But I feel like I have a luxury that I have these different cities in my DNA and part of my heritage.
And I guess that ties into this sense of what you do being accessible and global and reaching out to sort of a wider group of people as well. Did you find it quite, is there anything about the differences between different cultures and different cities and different kind of heritages that?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that when I know I'm showing in like Paris, I'm a little more chic, you know, and I think I went a little more bonkers when I was in London, because it's possible.
Why not? Yeah.
It's, you know, that's one of the things that's so beautiful about this city, is you can walk around wearing whatever the fuck you want and no one's going to bat an eyelash. And I love the city for that. It's such a great attitude about fashion in that way. And New York has such a kind of urban kind of street, like on the go kind of lifestyle aesthetic, and it's such a melting pot. There's so many different, you know, kind of, I don't know, entities there. So I'm sure that there's a part of that that seeps in just in the back of my subconscious, because I know who my audience is going to be when I'm showing someplace.
I'm interested when you say you know your audience as well, because you've been designing your own label since like 1997. Is there this sense of like the Jeremy Scott girl and that kind of that select group? Because you have said in interviews before, I know exactly who my customer is. I know what they like. Is it almost like a friendship now? You know exactly who you're aiming for. And
that's so beautiful. I never thought about it like that as a friendship. Yeah, I mean, I just, I try to be as pure as I can about what I do, and do what I feel is right, and do what I feel is my, my instinct, and not try to wait for myself to catch up to my inspiration and my thoughts. And I kind of think that, these are the things that people expect from me. They do expect, some kind of humor and print and color and something, bold, and something that's, unique in that way. And I kind of just try to always be that person and be that entity. People don't want boring clothes from me. People don't want safe clothes. People don't want a slick black something from me. And it's just not who I am, and not what people look for from me. So I just try to be really true to, I think, my DNA.
And you never find that frustrating? Because I think you're completely right when you say there's such a sense of kind of what you do, and I think that's such a strength of what you do, that people expect this very clear thing from you. But you never find that frustrating going into a season thinking, I'm going to have to do something funny, I'm going to have to do something slightly outlandish. You never find that limiting? I
don't know if I find it limiting, but of course there's always first of all, there's always the thought that, how am I going to top what I just did when people love something you've done? And there's always the thought of like, well, how do I keep people on their toes? And at the same time, I do think about that, and I do try to do things where I flip the switch, but still keeping things in the parameters that I should be in. And it is definitely, I don't think it's difficult. For me, it's just a challenge that I enjoy. I love challenges, and I love, it's like a game or a puzzle in a way, and how to kind of continue a message and renew it at the same time, so that there is something that is surprising or exciting for people at the same time, giving them something that they believe to be what is the correct frequency from you at the same time. I love challenges.
We've mentioned the humor aspect quite a lot, and we've both kind of said that people expect your work to be witty and to be funny, but there's like a darkness to your work, especially like I was looking back at some of the earlier collections. I think it was your first show that was the car crashes. You did a graduate collection that was like Chernobyl, and even like the Arab Springs collection from really recently. Do you like having this kind of depth, and is there something a bit darker sometimes that you like exploring?
Yeah, I do, and I think that but still, even I think when I'm thinking about things that are dark or serious, there's always somehow a lightness that comes through to it. And so, from any of those collections, there's still something that's, like the Chernobyl was thinking about how things would be, how to go forward in the future after the accident, and Arab Spring was definitely thinking about, how this whole political movement basically, was such a news media kind of blitz and revolution, and kind of this mix of cultures and things that a lot of us don't understand, and kind of owning up to that in a way, like, okay, these are concepts or preconceived ideas of what Arab culture is through the media. And I think that that's kind of, it's sometimes that is something very important, I think, for me to, kind of, talk about things that I feel like are things that are socially or news-wise, but not to be patronizing and like hit people over the head about it. Like, you need to learn, you need to reflect. It's just my way of getting out these things that I think are interesting or toiling around in my head when I'm, in my daily life.
People are quite dismissive of fashion when it tries to kind of, involve itself in serious issues or newsworthy issues. Do you think the reason you've been able to do that successfully is bringing in that wit and bringing in that element of...
I believe that any message that you can transmit with humor is always going to be more effective, stronger, and be received better. I just think that that's just it. From if you're trying to pick someone up to trying to say something serious to, try to, even convey condolence. I think that, and I just have a natural ability to find humor in almost every situation. I can have very desperate things, that everyone has happen in their life, and I can somehow from a tear turn it into a smile or a joke, even to myself. And I feel like, that's something I feel really blessed to have as a quality, because I feel like that's something that helps you just move forward, because I don't think there's any sense in wallowing.
Do you think the fashion industry isn't perhaps willing enough to laugh at itself? It's not a very humorous...
Absolutely not. It's very unhumorous in that way. And I think that's I think it's too bad. I feel like, you should be able to have humor. You should be able to poke fun, especially at yourself and what we do. It's not that serious. Of course, we all work very hard. Everyone in fashion knows that. It's a no-brainer. It's long hours, awful deadlines. There's, lot of cruelty in that way, because it really is. So many of us are perfectionists and striving for something that is almost unobtainable, like rumpling fabric to no end to make it be perfect. But it's just the life that we live, because we love these things and we search out this beauty in them. And I think that you should be able to poke a little fun at it.
Why do you think people don't? Do you think it is that pace that you mentioned, the fact that people work so hard, or do you think sometimes I wonder if it's, as you mentioned before, the kind of price point, the fact that it's so expensive, people almost feel like they can't laugh about it? What makes people take it so seriously?
It's a really interesting question. I've never really thought about why.
You're just having too much fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of, it's just like one of those things that's like, well, it just is. It is, and it is. And I never really thought about why is it, and why does it perpetuate? I would almost imagine it has to go back to insecurities,
Because you have been quite critical of the industry. Like, you made some interesting points about how you said like the work of so many designers, it looks so the same and you can't tell whose is whose. And do you find it quite a frustrating environment to be in sometimes?
It's because I love it so much. I won't think of myself as being critical, but as being passionate. And I love fashion, and I grew up loving fashion being so distinctly different, where there were so many different voices and so many different houses, and there's so many different styles that were all coexisting at the same time. And that was what was the beauty of it to me. And I feel like so much of that has been lost with things have become a lot more, like there's a homogeneous quality to fashion, and there's reasons behind it for it because of things like, factories all making, several different brands, and things then become more similar because of that. And even the superstar stylists that have come up, in the last, decade or so, where, they're working for this house and this house and this house. So they're carrying the same, kind of transmitting the same energy to these different, houses, and that's making things more similar. There's so many different reasons, and probably even more that I don't even know or think about, but it just makes me sad, because I feel like what's so great are these unique voices, and I feel like that's what the ultimate goal as a designer should be, is to have a distinct voice and a distinct vision, and something that's different than someone else.
This ties into something I wanted to ask you about, because you have turned down jobs at other houses, and quite publicly. Is that independence been really, really important to you, staying away from, whether it's Versace or Paco Rabanne or Chloe, staying away from that? Is that...
For me, I think my freedom is the most important thing, because it's just ultimately creating and designing is for me where I derive my biggest pleasure. And I also feel like beyond that, it's important for a new generation to have a new voice, and that there are so many houses that have been around for so long, and that's great, and it's wonderful for them to endure, and I have no disrespect towards them, but in the same sense, I feel like, isn't it important for a new generation to create a new name that could endure? And and furthermore, as a designer, if you're designing for another house, in a way, it's like doing a drag act. It's like you have to kind of portray this house to a degree, because it's a slippery slope if you don't, if you're not so much this style of this house, then you can be slated for being too much another thing, and then if you're too much another thing, you're not doing the house justice. So it's kind of like, how does one win in that? Yeah, it seems like a very difficult situation. Obviously, there's been people that have been very successful at it, like Mr. Lagerfeld, and it's possible, but it also seems like it can be a very difficult challenge. And I think for me, it's just always been really important for me to kind of create a voice that is very distinctly my own. And and of course, at the same time, I've done collaborations like my ongoing one with Adidas, which is a brand that has a huge heritage, a long history. But I've been very able to kind of twist that and create something new that is also distinctly my own. So it's been a wonderful hybrid at that point. And so that's where I think it's worked well for me.
You kind of talked about designers having a unique voice, and I find that interesting given what you said before about, like the pace and how people are quite similar now, designers, and it's hard to tell work from one designer apart from another. Do you think about sort of young talent coming through? And I wonder if there's room for someone to be, a Jeremy Scott coming out of college now and emerging, because the pressure and the pace of the industry is so intense now.
It's definitely a different world than when I started. There's so many more brands, there's so many more everything. It's just kind of, in one way, you could look at it like, well, there's more opportunity because there's even the internet, where people could just get their work out there in a way through this interweb. And then there's but then there's the other side of things, and thinking about, wow, there's just so many people, so much stuff, as you said, this pace and this kind of I don't even know, just kind of a brick wall to get through of things. So it's hard to say. If I thought about it, I wouldn't want to be starting today, just thinking about it, because I don't think I could wrap my brain around it. But maybe that's just because I'm an old fogey.
I'm sure that's not true. I actually want to go back a little bit and talk about some of your earlier work, because there is one collection which you've probably been asked to death about, but I want to ask about that gold collection.
Sure.
Because obviously it caused so much controversy, and people, got very angry about it. Some people called it misogynistic. What were you actually trying to say with that collection? What was...
That collection was called contre-pied, which is a French term for, it almost means like against foot, but it means going against the tide of things. And at that moment, we rewind fashion history. There was a very great designer that was very popular at that time named Helmut Lang, the real actual man named Helmut Lang, who designed that collection. And basically, he was kind of ruling the roost in fashion, and he's the reason why New York started going first. At that time, I think it was Paris, Milan, New York. I think it went that direction, but he flipped from Paris to New York, and he was able to even change the whole calendar, and that's how much people gave him attention and respect about what he's doing. And it was, he's famous for doing very minimal, sleek, no fuss, on the go clothes. And I was reacting against that kind of, because basically he set the gold standard, and everyone else was emulating this look. And being the young buck that I was, I was already through with that look, and I wanted to put my imprint, and that was something much more, in a way, ostentatious. And at that time, I mean, it's hard to even imagine that, like, the fact that the color gold, like gold metallic, was so decadent and 80s and not at all something seen as, fashionable, and that doing a show completely out of like gold lame, gold leather, gold 24 karat gold plated chain, gold fired porcelain corsets with gold, actual gold, being fired as the finish, that would be so shocking and decadent, but it was. And I also had the other kind of flip point was that I had Christian Louboutin. It was, I think, the first time we worked together. He did my shoes. Exactly. And I'd always heard these stories growing up about Marilyn Monroe sawing down one of her high heels a little bit so she would have this sexy gait when she walked. And I always was fascinated by this story. And so I wanted to kind of emulate that. So we did one high heel and one lower heel. And the whole collection was kind of about that. Even the makeup was kind of split in the middle. So one side was kind of made up more like glamorous, and one was like made down to be more soft. It was very much inspired by a Scavullo photo of Gia, where they showed like half the makeup. And so that was kind of the starting point. So I was thinking about everything, and there was like one sleeve would be like this exaggerated leg mouton, and then the other side was kind of more of a pointed, going in the other direction type sleeve. So there was kind of this kind of breaking everything. There was peplums, and they were kind of angled to the side, so they'd flip out to one side but almost be non-existent on the other. So it was all kind of about breaking it in half in that sense. And so that was also part of the high heel, and the hair, everything was kind of done in that kind of manner. And I think that a lot of it had to be, the brouhaha had to be that, I had just done a very all-white collection, which was exactly what I had wanted to do, and people got very excited about it. Isabella Blow came, and she had started championing me and just being super supportive, and she had just been so famously kind of on the fashion scene for discovering McQueen amongst others. And it was just, everyone's really paying attention to these kind of interworkings. And so from the white collection to the gold collection, all these people turned up. Anna Wintour, Andre Leon Talley, all these fashion big deals came to the show, and they came, I think, expecting to see something like the show they had not been at, but seen images of, and it was different, and it wasn't what they were expecting. And it was for me, I didn't change voices, is what I'm trying to say. Is like the white show and the gold show, I was already designing the gold show, and it's already a continuation of the white show as far as me as an artist and as a creative individual and as a designer. But I think the perception was so different. And so it just kind of was too much for people to handle for that moment, which is kind of amazing, to be able to do something shocking without trying to shock, and something that could go down in history where people were like, he should never design again, this is outrageous, this is, all this stuff. I mean, it was filthy, some of the things people said about me. And, it was very much the old establishment, though, because the clothes were shot, and in every amazing magazine, they were, all the stylists and all the young people got it, loved it. And it was a real break in the time of the old establishment, and that there was a new young guard coming up. And that was kind of very interesting. And it was a very difficult time, because, I was 22 or something, and I had not had that much experience in things, and it's like one day everyone's telling you you're fabulous and you're amazing and you're like the next thing, and then people are telling you should basically die. It was definitely traumatic in a lot, things, and I learned a big lesson, and I definitely grew thicker skin, and it's been something that served me well, and I don't get caught up in what people say anymore, good or bad. I love a nice compliment like any other human being, and I can take a punch just like any grown man, and I'm not going to let those things now, break me, and I know who I am, and I have to do what I feel is right. And that was what was a very distinct thing, because I don't think it had really happened, and I don't know if I've even seen it happen so much since, but it was definitely a very interesting moment.
You did touch on it, and I want to talk about it a bit more, is whether when something does shock or when people find it controversial, because people always say about you, and I think it's quite a sweeping statement, they're like, oh, he's one of fashion's last rebels, and that kind of notion that's attached to you of being a bit, like subversive and a bit insolent. Do you quite like that? Is there something that fashion can provoke? And I found it interesting you said it can shock even when I'm not intending to shock.
Often I'm shocking when I'm not intending to shock, and that's what's kind of, the thing. It's, it's not something I'm not like trying to expose, like, a woman's breasts at the end of the runway to like upset someone, or, so many other things that you can do to try to like kind of get attention. It's like getting attention through actually the clothes, and that's kind of something that's, I feel like I don't even know. I kind of accept it that, this is what's going to happen sometimes. I don't ever know when it's going to happen or what it is, some of the things that's going to trigger people. I mean, you could think one thing will and another thing won't, and then it could be vice versa. And I don't set out to do it. I just try to be very pure in what I feel like I should do and what I should offer and what I should say, and not censor myself in that sense, and not try to hold back because of fear of what people are going to think or what people are going to do or how they're going to react, and just know that I'm giving it pure of heart, and that's my intention. And so I mean, if someone's going to bear the cross of being a rebel, I'm happy to bear that cross. I don't really think anything of it. I feel like I'm a very tame, nice person, so I don't feel like I'm that rebellious. But maybe it's just in my work.
I want to change tack a bit and talk about another huge aspect of your work, which is your work with musicians.
Sure.
Because to me that's so sort of central to what you do. What is it about working with pop stars that you love? Does it just go back to that pop culture thing? Or?
Yeah, it does. I love the way that they, first of all, I mean, their job is to kind of just be so amazingly them and be so like synthesize this kind of image that they're creating, and that's why it's so much fun to work with them. And my clothes often help continue to convey that message, and that's what's really exciting. And whether it's things that I've already designed that are on the runway, or things that I create especially for them that are for a tour or for a music video or for a photo, I love that, getting in there and working with them as icons themselves, and kind of twisting the perceptions or adding another layer to it, or continuing to convey a story that they're trying to tell. And I think that is really exciting, that when my clothes are, let's say, on a model versus on a musician, that the musician already has this whole other history and story to them.
There's already a narrative there.
Absolutely, there's a narrative, and so they're basically like a beacon to the world. And again, just like as Bart or Mickey Mouse could be an icon to transmit an image or an idea or a concept, so is Madonna or Katy Perry or Rihanna or Rita. They're able to kind of give these messages and kind of touch people and in a way that maybe high fashion and a fashion show cannot, or a fashion magazine cannot, because there's a different meaning to them and a different layer. So I love that again, it's a communication, and I feel, it's also just, a lot of it's just so much fun because they're such exemplary personalities with so much, you know, panache and so much talent.
This got me thinking a lot when I was thinking about the questions I wanted to ask you about the interplay between fashion and music, because if you actually ask a lot of people for a great fashion moment, it is so often tied to music. It's so, you know, like you mentioned kind of Madonna or someone like that, but there is this idea that they're kind of at odds with each other, but fashion has an incredibly sort of complex relationship, where on one hand, I think, as you mentioned, high fashion kind of looks down on musicians, but it's starting to embrace it more. Do you kind of agree with that like fashion has its greatest moments when it's on like a musician or
Absolutely.
off the runway?
I mean, when I think about growing up, I think about seeing videos like In Vogue's video where they had all these Gautier pieces and they were even emulating a runway show and Free Your Mind. And, you know, I think about things like George Michael's Too Funky video with the supermodels and all of that, or you know, Freedom video with the girls lip syncing. You think about, you know, how powerful those images were when they were married to fashion's iconography. And I feel like, yeah, it just makes the message that much stronger, that much more resilient, and that much more fearless in a way. And I think that that's always been very exciting. I mean, you know, I've always loved, you know, like one of the things I always loved about growing up and having MTV was the way it was another way of seeing fashion, basically.
I want to ask a little bit, because we've talked a lot about icons and what inspires you. Is there any sort of one icon or person that has inspired you more than anyone else, whether that's a fictitious person like Mickey?
More than anyone else? I don't think that any one has more presence or prevalence than any other. I mean, of course I grew up in a time of Madonna, so I mean, you know, she has an enduring effect, and you know, she kind of just broke down so many barriers for so many different things, and we really owe her such a large gratitude, debt in so many respects. And but I mean, I think there's just so many different things and different elements. I mean, in one way I think so much about Andy Warhol, because I just think about how much, in a different way, how he is, you know, how he touched pop culture in so many ways. And that's always been something that I emulated, is how from he was doing magazines and doing films and obviously doing paintings and doing portraits and appearing in TV ads with products and just kind of being on the Love Boat and it just kind of permeating into pop culture. And I always thought that that was, you know, the right thing to do. And he's always been very much a blueprint for me in that respect.
You talked about permeating into pop culture, and that leads me really nicely to asking about your Adidas collaboration, because that obviously kind of had this monumental effect and was just so incredibly popular. Did you realize it was going to be such a kind of success when you came up with the concept, when you started designing?
I don't know if I really thought about how like ubiquitous it would become. I don't really think I had the forethought to think it would be so global. But I knew I wanted it to be, and I knew that I really wanted to create, first of all, some shoes that would become icons themselves, like the Wings shoe. So I was really determined that there was something that I needed to kind of create that could just be a lasting, you know, kind of mark in that sense. And then, you know, I've just been so pleased and so excited about how people have embraced the collection and the shoes and the apparel, and how they've made it their own. And I love seeing people wearing it and seeing people on the street and seeing how excited people are to have it. And it's definitely, it's been such a joy for me to have that way of connecting with people.
So what's next for Jeremy Scott?
Well, I just launched a baby buggy last night here in London. So now all the young, cool parents can have an extension of their life with their baby buggies and car seats and whatnot, because I feel like it's not fair for young parents to have to like divorce their style when they have a baby. It's not, you know, why should they have to be boring about the things that they have for their children, even the things that are basically an accessory to them because they're having to carry it around for their children. So I'm very excited about that. My the smart car I designed, the edition that is actually available and street legal, just launched 2 days ago in Shanghai. So that's going to be available in the next couple months for people to actually to purchase and drive around the streets of the world, not just Europe and the United States. So that's exciting, and I'm just gonna do more of the same with just the volume turned up.
That's a good note to end on. More of the same, but the volume turned up. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
My pleasure.